Donald Trump once scoffed at Canadian oil, declaring it unnecessary for a self-reliant United States. In the blink of an eye, though, he pivoted to urging its swift delivery via a pipeline slicing across North America. How could one leader swing so wildly from condemnation to invitation? For anyone who's tracked the fractured relationship between Trump and Canada, it's no surprise. His positions have a way of morphing overnight. But this story isn't just about a former president's shifting rhetoric. It's about billions of dollars in trade, thousands of jobs at stake, and an entire continent's energy security teetering on the edge. If you thought US-Canada relations were always polite and predictable, think again. Today, we're diving deep into the back-and-forth drama, the looming tariffs, and the startling demand that Canada join the United States as its 51st state. And by the end, you'll be left questioning whether these events are about genuine strategy or political showmanship, because there's more to this conflict than meets the eye. At the height of his first term, Trump couldn't say enough negative things about Canadian oil. He stood on podiums from Texas to Ohio, insisting that North Dakota's shale output made imports from Alberta pointless. Sound bites from that era still ring out. "We don't need Canadian oil. We've got all we need right here in America." This was his rallying cry, fueling a narrative that the United States was, or soon would be, the world's leading energy powerhouse. So powerful, in fact, that neighboring resources were downright irrelevant. The appeal of this message to a certain swath of voters was obvious. It symbolized energy independence, economic dominance, and a measure of national pride. Each new drilling site in the Dakotas or Texas felt like another wedge between the US and its historical reliance on foreign energy pundits, on conservative talk shows, lauded the idea of insulating America from global price shocks by cutting ties with outside oil providers. At the time, Canada's significance seemed lost in the shuffle. A century of neighborly energy trade? Unimportant? Or so Trump's speeches suggested. Behind the scenes, though, the reality was far more complex. US refineries along the Gulf Coast were built specifically to process the heavier crude that flows south from the Canadian oil sands. Even during the height of Trump's anti-Canada rhetoric, major oil companies quietly maintained strong ties with suppliers up north. It was an open secret in the oil industry that no matter how loudly the president boasted of domestic abundance, true self-sufficiency was a long way off. Yet, those early jabs continued, painting Canadian imports as a burden the US could cast aside at will. But that wasn't the whole story. Suddenly, almost without warning, Trump's stance lurched in the opposite direction. Instead of dismissing Canada's contribution, he started praising the idea of reviving a massive pipeline project that had already been scrapped once under President Joe Biden. By the time he was posting eagerly on his own social platform, Truth Social, Trump was urging companies to come back and rebuild Keystone XL fast, promising swift approvals and minimal red tape. This whiplash caught many off guard. How could the same person who insisted the US was drowning in its own oil now be rolling out the red carpet for Canadian crude? Trump's rhetoric shifted to focus on job creation. He claimed that constructing the pipeline would yield thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of positions. He tied the Keystone XL dream to a broader narrative of economic resurgence, painting an image of new refineries buzzing with activity, laborers earning a living wage, and the US regaining its place as an unstoppable energy giant. Environmental concerns, of course, came rushing in right behind the renewed Keystone plan. Critics pointed to the extraction methods in Alberta's tar sands, which produce significantly more carbon emissions than traditional crude. Conservationists raised alarms over potential pipeline leaks, highlighting that the proposed route would run through Nebraska's sandhills and near the Ogallala Aquifer, a vital water source for America's breadbasket. Indigenous communities argued that their land rights and sacred territories were at risk. None of those worries slowed Trump's call to arms, though. He was laser-focused on speed. Easy approvals, almost immediate start, became his new mantra, even as the rest of the country debated whether this massive infrastructure push was worth its environmental cost. Yet, the tale doesn't end there. Within days of voicing renewed support for Canadian energy, Trump made another move. He slapped a 25% tariff on imports from both Canada and Mexico, sparing some energy products with a 10% rate. Standing alongside French President Emmanuel Macron, he announced the tariffs would be on time, on schedule, no delays, no excuses. Instantly, US-Canada tensions soared. The Canadian dollar dipped, American manufacturers braced for higher costs on raw materials, and the entire notion of cross-border cooperation felt threatened. Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, wasn't about to take this lying down. He swiftly declared his intent to implement counter-tariffs aimed at protecting Canadian workers and industry. Within hours, officials in Ottawa unveiled a two-phase plan targeting everything from American agricultural goods to consumer products. Phase 1 would slap hefty taxes on items like beef, dairy, produce, household appliances, and cosmetics, while Phase 2 ramped up the pressure on U.S. automakers and even considered choking off critical mineral exports. It was a clear message to the White House. If you wound us, we'll wound you back. Far from being a minor tiff, this trade dispute threatened billions of dollars in commerce. Factories in Ontario that relied on American auto parts trembled at the idea of disrupted supply chains, just as much as farmers in Iowa or Kansas worried about losing vital Canadian markets. Everyday consumers, too, stood to feel the pinch, with grocery prices inching upward and entire industries teetering on uncertainty. The clash exposed a stark contradiction in Trump's statements. One moment, he claimed not to need Canada. The next, he was imposing tariffs that could hurt countless American businesses reliant on cross-border trade. And what happened next would shock everyone. As if higher duties and a pipeline debate weren't enough, Trump decided to pour more fuel on the fire. In a barrage of Truth Social posts, he floated the notion that Canada would be better off as an extension of the United States. He framed it as a win-win. Canada would get lower taxes, a stronger military umbrella, and total removal of tariffs. The US would gain total access to Canada's resources, from oil to timber to minerals, all under the banner of American sovereignty. In Trump's eyes, this was the ultimate solution to a drawn-out economic skirmish. Predictably, Canadian leaders responded with outrage. The suggestion that their country ought to forfeit its independence came across as both insulting and surreal. Political commentators worldwide jumped on the story, labeling Trump's remarks the pinnacle of American hubris. Some even joked that he was reviving a 19th century dream of manifest destiny, except in reverse. Rather than expanding westward, the idea was to absorb Canada wholesale. For many Canadians, this was no joking matter. Online forums lit up with citizens who viewed the comment as a direct attack on their national identity. Others saw it as yet another example of Trump's flair for provocation, words designed to stoke chaos rather than reflect realistic policy. As the storyline continued to unfold, one could only wonder whether this was a genuine plan or the ultimate bargaining chip brandished to rattle the neighbor to the north. But the contradictions didn't stop there. For all Trump's talk about self-sufficiency, the United States and Canada remain deeply intertwined on the energy front. Even during his boldest declarations that we don't need what they have, data told another story. More than 4 million barrels of Canadian crude flow into the U.S. each day, comprising over 60% of America's total oil imports. Meanwhile, pipelines across the Great Lakes region carry natural gas from Canadian fields to American consumers, sometimes heating entire neighborhoods. Refineries along the Gulf Coast are optimized to handle Canada's heavier variety of crude. Energy analysts consistently point out that switching to domestic sources overnight isn't just difficult, It's practically impossible without major infrastructure overhauls. Talk of a 51st state may be shocking, but in reality, Canada and the US are locked in a careful dance. Both countries share a vested interest in keeping the oil and the money flowing. Trump's repeated vow to cut Canada loose overlooks the fact that many of his own supporters rely on cheap imports to run their cars, power their businesses, and fill up at the pump without breaking the bank. This interdependence became especially visible as Canada reviewed the option of export controls on key resources. That included the potential to limit shipments of lithium, nickel, and cobalt, minerals essential for electric vehicle batteries. With EV production on the rise, such a step could paralyze entire segments of the US auto industry. Yet Trump's rhetoric rarely acknowledged the delicate balance. Even as he championed the notion of energy autonomy, every pipeline and cross-border shipment of minerals contradicted the idea that the US could easily detach itself. And if you think the pipeline debate was fierce, brace yourself for the next shock. While Trump declared he wanted Keystone XL rebuilt now, the company behind it, TC Energy, had already moved on. After President Biden revoked its permit in 2021, the firm wound down construction, sold off steel pipes, and signaled a shift toward greener ventures. Reassembling that project wouldn't just require fresh permits, it'd mean billion-dollar investments to restart an effort that had been left for dead. Environmental reviews, indigenous consultations, and landowner agreements would all have to begin anew. Still, Trump's supporters saw a tantalizing opportunity. They argued the pipeline would boost continental independence and keep foreign adversaries at bay. They pointed to rising tensions in global oil markets, especially in places like the Middle East or Venezuela, and insisted that relying on a friendly neighbor was the wiser strategy. On the flip side, environmental activists felt their worst fears being realized. Their biggest victory, ending Keystone XL, now hung in the balance as Trump vowed to push it forward. Meanwhile, indigenous groups across multiple U.S. states reiterated their opposition, citing both environmental risks and the historical trampling of tribal rights. The swirl of conflicting interests left everyone uncertain. Could an entirely new company step in if TC Energy refused? Who would fund it? And how quickly could they navigate legal hurdles? The pipeline debate rekindled deeper conversations about fossil fuels' future, climate change, and what it truly means for North America to be energy secure. For every promise of job creation, critics saw climate repercussions. For each claim that we need that oil, naysayers pointed to the US ramping up its own drilling. But even that tension was overshadowed by an even bigger rift